Okay, so hopefully that's working. Hi everyone, my name's James Spurrin, and today I'm going to be doing this presentation, which is creating awesome labs with Docker, Docker Compose, and a bit of Google Cloud Shell in the mix as well. So my background, I've worked in IT for the last 20 years or so. Some of you I actually know from those various positions, so really great companies. I worked at Nomura, Goldman Sachs, Dell EMC, and back in the day, I actually worked at Demon Internet. Is anyone here who remembers the Demon Internet ISP days? Okay, so you're old like me, in a nutshell. I'm quite a big advocate of open source and a variety of different projects which I've actually got on my GitHub. But this one in particular, what I'm going to actually talk to you about today, is probably the one I'm most proud of, and I think can actually have the biggest impact on some of the things you're actually doing in your own workplace. At the moment, I'm the founder of my own company, which is called Dive Into, and I've actually switched out to focusing on creating technical education content, which this is actually what this is relating to as well. So back in 2018, I created a course called Mastering Ansible. And at the time when I actually created it, I noticed the Ansible t-shirt over there, by the way. When I actually created that course, the lab environment was actually built in Virtualbox. So, you had to spin up Virtualbox. There was quite a bit of configuration with networking and, so on and so forth. And a lot of the time, people would actually come to me and they'd say, why don't you actually give out the labs in Docker? And, it's a great suggestion, but it's a little bit more difficult than it sounds. As you know, you've got a virtual machine. Typically with a virtual machine, you've got a lot more running just as that base. But I had this opportunity to actually recreate the course, and I thought, okay, as I do this, let's actually see if I can create these labs in Docker and make them more effective so that they actually work. Essentially giving that VM type experience, but running in a container. So as we actually go through this, what I'm going to do is, rather than death by PowerPoint, I'm going to actually show you the environment actually running, and then we can actually circle back and see how it works. So in this demo, what I'm going to do is quickly show you how easy we can actually spin up, and this is Docker Compose in the background, but we'll have a Ansible control node, we'll have 3 CentOS nodes, 3 Ubuntu nodes, web terminal access to all of those various nodes, SSH access to all of them as well. We'll have all of the SSH relationships pre-configured, so somebody actually getting started or wanting to actually do something with Ansible, they haven't got to worry about that. And we'll also have some reverse proxies. So if you actually run anything on these nodes, which serves as a web page, you can easily access those services. And again, all of this is for free and hopefully in under 5 minutes. And you can take those philosophies yourself, and whether it's making labs, whether it's doing something else, it's a great way of actually showcasing open source software and having it so that anybody can easily access it. So for convenience, just quickly before I start the demo, here are the actual resources. If you've got a phone to hand and you want to quickly be able to grab that resource, you can just get that there. And off that page, everything, this is the main source code repository for the lab, but within that, it's also got links to all of the Docker files, which you can actually use. And another QR code, this is the link for actually launching the playground quickly with Google Cloud Shell. And I'll show that as well, how you actually do this, and it's literally like a 20-minute job, and you get that benefit of Google Cloud Shell. Okay, so let me escape out of that and close this. Okay, so I'm going to go into diveinto.com/p/playground. And just going to click this link. And here, where you actually get the prompt to open in Cloud Shell, you don't actually have to trust this repo. It's if you want to actually give additional permissions. I'm just going to click confirm. And that's provisioning cloud machine. And what I'll do, I'll just pump up this on the size. Is that easy to read there? That's good. Okay. So what we've actually got, we've got this launched in Cloud Shell, and on the right-hand side, we've got this tutorial. And you could actually read through the steps. I'll just go through it in the interest of time quite quickly. But you have these buttons here where you can just copy to Cloud Shell or copy it to your clipboard. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to clone the lab environment. Did that go? Hang on. It's done it twice. Hang on. There we go. So we'll clone the lab environment. When we're actually going through the course for Dive Into Ansible, I talk through setting up SSH keys and all the relationships, how they work. But I have this as an optional step here, so you can actually skip that and you can have all of the keys set up. And then I'm going to do, quite simply, a Docker compose up. And that takes about a minute. So just while that's running, if we go to github.com, we go to that Dive Into Ansible Lab repository, what you can actually see there, so this pause button, I actually fixed this morning. It's a caching problem, but this lab has had about 250,000 pulls of it, so it's, you know, it's been thoroughly tested across the world. And within this, we have the Docker Compose files. So here we actually have all of the various instances. So Ubuntu C is your Ansible host. We've then got the free Ubuntu hosts, the free CentOS host. We've got a Docker in Docker and a portal that I'll actually show you as well. And as I said, you can actually run this locally on your system, or you can actually run it in the cloud as I'm showing. And further down at the bottom, there's actually a link to those images. So let's see how that's actually doing. And we're just in that last step. Okay, brilliant. And you've got this attaching here, and I've got a friendly helper right at the bottom, so you can actually click this and it tells you where to get the web preview icon. So within this lab, I've got a portal image, a web image that is listening on 8080. And I specifically picked that port because it's the same one as the default for Google Cloud Shell. So if I click this, and it gives you like a little modal pop-up, and we click preview, and you can actually see here we've got the portal which I provide as part of the course. So you can actually go into here and you've got this Ansible terminal, you've got your host terminals, and right at the bottom you've got this reverse proxy. So I'm going to just go into the Ansible one, and something I didn't actually show there, which I meant to on the previous page, the format of the Google Cloud Shell URLs. This bit here is the actual instance, and this first bit is the actual port it's connecting to. So previously that was just 8080. So I'm just going to log in now. So Ansible, and the password by default is just password, and straight away we can actually ping all of these various different hosts. We can ping the Ubuntu ones. And if we like, we can SSH to those as they are. So it's kind of perfect for Ansible usage. You're really ready to go. And just to show this, I'll just put Ansible host key check-in equals false. And we'll just do an ad hoc inventory here. And then all of those, and we'll do the ping module. We'll just do like a one-line output. And there you go. You can see that as quickly as that, you're able to actually have something that you can be quite effective with in Ansible. And these have been quite simple examples. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to actually grab the source code. When I say the source code, sorry, with the course, we've actually got a whole load of examples that we talk through. I'm going to grab those, and I'm going to show you one of the more complicated ones, because it really gives a good overview of, how well these container images actually work. So I'm going to go into Ansible Playbooks, Introduction, Ansible Playbooks, Creating and Executing, into the solution, the last revision. And during the course, we actually do some manipulation and we talk about host vars, etc. Because this is vanilla at the moment, I'm just going to remove the host vars that I customized for one of the hosts because it is standard at the moment. And let's run an Ansible playbook and see this in action. Okay, so this at the moment, it's going off and it's actually gathering facts on all of those various different, and I refer to them as hosts, but we know they're just in the containers. And that's a really good sign when you think about it, because when Ansible is gathering facts, it's going to be going off and, running various commands, which, you would typically need in that container environment. So it's a good sign that that's actually working as you would expect. It's installing Nginx here. For the CentOS hosts, to install Nginx, we actually need to have EPEL configured, so that's what that step above does. That's why it's actually skipped on the Ubuntu hosts. We'll just let this finish. Always seems to take longer when you're doing a live demo. Come on, internet, be on my side. Thank you. So yeah, just on that note, where I actually put this out, I mean, this environment, I built it, and the course has had about 20,000 students now in over 130 countries. So I've seen lots and lots of different problems with this. Some different variations of Linux or Windows subsystem, and yeah, I've been able to tweak a lot in the background, which is what I'll actually get to after this demo, and then I'll show those issues that I actually encountered and how I got past those issues. And it's all there as open source. You don't have to go through those issues yourself. You can just use this as it is. Okay, great. So it installed Nginx, it's restarting Nginx. In this part of the course, what we actually do is we go through and it's setting up like a web application, and I wanted it to be a bit more fun. So we actually install this Easter egg. We hide this Easter egg in the web application, and this is all running now. And if I go back, I'm going to switch that port back to 8080 to go back to the portal. And if we go to the reverse proxy, and we actually pick one of those now, so I'll pick Ubuntu 1, you can actually see now that we're hitting the web, the Nginx web page, which is actually serving on that one. And the Easter egg that we actually do on the course is essentially just changing this icon so that we get this Ansible game that we've actually put in. And it's actually got some good music, but you can't hear it. And the idea being with this game, as we all know, whoever's actually worked with YAML at some point, it's all about the indentation. And this game, what you've actually got to do is you've got to line them up, and you've actually got to get them on. And if you get them really on, you get like that, you get a wow. And we've got some nice little artifacts going in the background. There's some Ansible balloons. There's an Ansible plane. There's like a DevOps one. We'll see what we can actually see. I get one of the planes. I'm generally kind of happy. There we go. There's the answer. Am I going to get the DevOps one for us? Come on, one more. There we go. There's the DevOps plane. So I'll just wrap that up. But what's really quite amazing on this is that when you're actually running this in Google Cloud Shell, you've actually got two layers of reverse proxy, because you've got the reverse proxy which Google Cloud Shell is doing, where we went through ttyd, and you've got the reverse proxy here. And as you could actually see from this, I mean, it's flawless. It works really, really well. You wouldn't know that you're actually being proxied twice. So yeah, this is essentially what I actually built. So let's have a look behind the covers now. So if I go back to this, and if you recall, this is the this is the main page for that lab environment, and I openly push this. I often, if there's another Ansible course, if there's another teaching, it doesn't matter. I like people actually using this, and by all means, take from this, build your own labs, or do something different with the images. But if we go to the bottom, what we've actually got here, we've got this link with the actual images, and I've tried to actually keep these images modular. So they're actually built as a hierarchy there that you can actually see. So we start off with this container -systemd, then we actually build on it, which then adds sshd and ttyd. So ttyd is actually one of the magic ingredients here. Amazing project. This is what actually allows you to get those web terminals. And quite simply, you can run this. You can say ttyd, run it with bash. It would start listening on a web port. You can access it. Boom, you've got that. And yeah, lots of great things you can actually pull that into. So yes, that's the second layer. And then the third layer is really just some tweaking and customization for how I want it to actually look. So let's look at that first one, container systemd. And look at that, the Docker pulls button works on the one I didn't really want it to work on, but alas. So here's some of the overview of the compatibility. I've worked very hard to actually get this so that it's working, with C groups v1 version 2. I have everything in place so that these are cross-architectural builds, so that they will run on ARM and Intel as well, and within the Windows subsystems. And if we actually pick one of the different branches, so the one I'm going to start on here is Ubuntu. And everything is, the main branch is just an overview page. Each of the contents are actually in these individual branches. So where we have the Ubuntu one here, you can actually take this and you can run this. And I'll do this in a moment, but what I'm just going to talk about is what you actually see there. If you were doing a Docker run, I'm guessing a lot of you do this, you'll run a container and then you'll put the command at the end. had to do something a little bit different here with this being systemd, because when you run systemd in a container, it expects to run as the first process. So, and normally if you actually run a container and you don't have that entry point, this would actually take that role as the process that you're running. So what I actually did with this, I have this wrapper script, this container entry point. And if you run it without an entry point, it's going to run systemd, and then it would be looking for any service files that you drop in. But if you run it with a command, what it actually does is it takes that command, it builds an ad hoc systemd service file on the fly, it drops it in, it starts systemd as the first process, then whatever that service file is, it then executes that. So that's how I actually get around and make it so that you can run it with this. So let's just go to a, let's just go down. Hang on. Hopefully that's a good size. Okay, and there you go. You've actually got systemd running and you're actually inside of that. Now, there was a good reason I actually picked Ubuntu here as the first one. And what I actually want to show you is this entry here, which actually says default hierarchy equals legacy. So what I actually found with this, when I built this environment, I tried it on my local system, I tried it on some others, it seemed to work well. I pushed it out to the world, and then all of a sudden I found that some users, especially those with like the Windows subsystem for Linux, they would run, and all of a sudden the CentOS ones, they seemed completely rock solid. I used to consider them the cockroach containers. They would work in every possible environment. But the Ubuntu ones they would fail, and they'd have this, error 255, they would have stopped. And at the time, I was able to actually do little workarounds and get around it. But I wanted to really understand why, what was the big difference? Why are these CentOS ones much better than the Ubuntu ones? And I dug into it, and I noticed that when the CentOS containers started, they had this default hierarchy equals legacy. The Ubuntu ones had this unified. And so I, investigated, and I found that you could actually change this, but it was a kernel parameter, which really doesn't help you when you're using Docker, because Docker's got the shared kernel. A lot of the time when you're running things in the likes of Docker Desktop, it's a hidden virtual machine which is out of the way. You can't really change this. So I was like, how can I actually get around this? And, is this actually the problem? But I dug into it and I investigated it further. And what I actually did, I did a bit of a sneaky on this one. So if you have a look in the Docker file, for Ubuntu, they are multi-stage builds. And what I do as one of the initial stages is I grab, right by here, you can actually see using apt source, I grab the source code for systemd, and then I actually patch systemd, and I tell it, no, on Ubuntu, your default hierarchy is legacy. I patch it, I build a .deb package, and then in the main build, I actually then install from that. So previously, when I started these out, I was just doing a apt install systemd. Now I actually do that custom one, and it was actually amazing, because when with C Groups version 2 and more distributions push into C Groups version 2, this was also one of the areas that needed to be done to actually make that work. So yeah, that's the Ubuntu ones. The CentOS ones are pretty much stock. Most of the time I just use the Ubuntu and the CentOS 8 but I have started experimenting with some others there. So there's working ones with CentOS, Stream 9, and newer versions of Ubuntu. So if you wanted to make use of those, you could. If you try out any other different ones and get it working, send me a pull request and I'll merge it in. It would be brilliant to get some more. So that was that first stage. And then we add on SSHD and ttyd. And on this one, this was the turn where CentOS was a problem for me and Ubuntu was completely awesome. So as I mentioned earlier, that project ttyd, it allows you to run a process and present it, as a web front end. So if you just did ttyd bash, whoever accesses that web port would have a shell straight in. There would be no interaction. But I wanted these to actually look like virtual machines. Even though they're in a container, I wanted them to have that feel. So rather than actually using a direct bash as the command, I used user bin login, so that they get the prompt, it logs in, just looks more like a real system. And I tried it on Ubuntu, worked absolutely perfect. I tried it on CentOS, and you would access the web page and it would just be this continuous flashing and crashing and going off. And it took me absolutely ages to work this one out. I was completely out of my comfort zone, so I was S-tracing this and looking through, and I could see that there was a load of file handlers being closed just before it was crashing off. And what I eventually found on it, and this is actually here, so the login program, user bin login, it comes from util-linux, and on CentOS and similar distributions, they use the standard upstream. Ubuntu-based distributions, they use this shadow package variant, and there must be something in there. But after I pinpointed that all of these file handlers were getting closed, I eventually found this talk of where it was actually there, and unfortunately, just in the last couple of days, this has disappeared. I wish I'd put it on Internet Archive. Mental note: if you put something in like this, maybe do an Internet Archive, include that in your comments as well. But yeah, essentially the talk on this thread, somebody had actually encountered this bit of code, and they said, whilst nobody has actually reported this as an issue for 20 years, we shouldn't, when this starts, we should be closing these file descriptors. I've put the patch in, there you go. And, naturally, probably never ever accounted for somebody like myself running this in ttyd. So what was actually happening, this ttyd was starting up, it was running this process, then this process was closing the file descriptors which were actually being used by ttyd, and then you were getting that crashback loop. So what I've actually done in this one is I've got quite a simple patch. I just reverted it to how it was before I took out those closed file descriptors, and that then gave me the consistency. So this is how, when you actually log into one of these, you actually see that nice little prompt ready to go. And yeah, lastly, after that, so these are the SSHD and the ttyd implementations. So you can look through those doc files. They're pretty straightforward on the SSH side. I configure SSH, and I just tweak it so that you can actually log in as a root user, because it is just a lab, and that's kind of useful on the Ansible side for playing about. And then lastly, I actually take those and I build the images that I present to the course. And So for example, on the Ansible side, you know, I put common tools on there. So I put Vim and I put Nano just in case there's a variety of different experience on there. Common, utilities, IP route 2, etc. And then I install Ansible and I put some fixes in place that help Ansible to actually run. So all of those are there as well. All of those are open source, and we've got the various different ones, including the portal application that you actually see there. And
where did you share the SSH key? Was it? I saw the key gen earlier on.
So what I actually do with the let me show you. If I go back, that's a great question. If I go back, what I've actually got in here, this container systemd one, I think it's this one. Here. So what I actually do is there's a config directory, and if, for example, those keys already exist in that config directory, then as it starts up, it will actually use these various keys. So by default, when I actually start the lab up, I don't actually anyone who's actually a student on that, I don't do that. They're expected to go through configure SSH keys, learn that if they don't actually know it. But I've got this logic just in this scripture where it will go through and it will configure those if they already exist. And you can kind of see this. If I go back to that tutorial, look what I do here. So I'm just doing a SSH key gen, and then I'm dumping them in that config directory. And because that config directory is shared to every container, they then all start up. They configure those as their trusted keys, and because they're all using the same ones, you can hop to the other ones. Yeah. So that covers the lab and the images. What I want to actually show you is this bit now. So I'm just going to go back to this slide and just let that replay. And this bit, the Google Cloud Shell bit. So for a long time, I actually run it. When I give this out on the course, people were expected to run this themselves in, Docker on their system. But, you would have some students, they, didn't have very powerful machines, they had older systems. I mean, hey, this is like a 2013 MacBook. I'm more of a desktop person myself. So I wanted something that could actually run there. So when you go to that page, diveinto.com/p/playground, and you see that button opening Google Cloud Shell, I've actually taken that hyperlink here and I've broken it down. So the top line is the standard URL for Google Cloud Shell. Then we've got parameters. So we've got the question mark and the first parameter, and we've got Cloud Shell _image. And what you can actually do with Cloud Shell, you can build your own custom images. And this was a route that I went down initially, building these custom images. It's, not very well documented. I managed to actually get there. You have to actually host the images on the Google Compute platform. I tried actually seeing if I could actually do it elsewhere. It didn't work. And the most important thing to note, if you actually do that, you will end up paying ingress and egress charges every time someone uses it. Another thing, I noticed after I'd done this, I was a bit busy at the time, and I got back to it after like 2 weeks, and all of a sudden it wasn't working. And I was like, okay, what's going on? And you get this very, unhelpful, just couldn't provision VM instance. And I reached out to one of my friends who works at Google. He inquired and he found someone, who worked on the Cloud Shell team. And what it turns out, the base image for that, the one that you actually see on the second line, is updated frequently. And if you make a custom image, even if you've made no changes to that custom image that you've got, you will need to actually update and refresh it and republish it. Otherwise, Google Cloud Shell will not actually execute. So I did try with it, and then I thought, do you know what? I'm just going to actually simplify this. One, I don't want to actually be paying for anything, and I don't want this hassle of updating. So what I actually do there is the image. I just pass in their image, and then I bring in the efforts as part of this tutorial. So next there, you actually see this Cloud Shell Git repo and you know, this path there. And this is a repo that is going to get cloned when you actually start up. So if I go to my GitHub, and into here, this is quite simple. It's just a markdown file, and there's that button again. It's a markdown file, and there's the actual commands that I was running as we actually went through this. And all you actually do, if you then go back to the parameters, is it will download that repo, and then you tell it Cloud Shell tutorial, and you tell it which file to actually use. So you just point at that tutorial.md, and then lastly, the you know, the bit at the bottom there, shell only equals true. That gives you a much cleaner environment with Google Cloud Shell. And you know, if you're wanting someone to actually demo or try out your application, put that on there. They don't get, you know, all of the other stuff that typically pops up. So yeah, that's my presentation. If any of you actually are interested in the course, I've actually put a discount code there, so it's like $12 or so if you are interested in it. And along the bottom are my social connections. So I've got a YouTube channel, Dive Into @JamesSpurin on Twitter. There's my LinkedIn. And the last bit, just before questions, I'm currently working on a free Kubernetes course. I've filmed it all. It's going to be about an hour and a half. It's really, really good. It's kind of the, had a frustration with a lot of Kubernetes courses with how you see this, all of this. This is the architecture, but you don't really actually do anything with it, any hands-on. It's just, you learn this, then you're using Kubernetes. So I've kind of gone with a different approach with this, with, hey, here's Kubernetes, but this is how the architecture really works. We're going to actually go step by step with examples and see that. That's going to be free. That's a community give back. I'm hoping to actually get it out before KubeCon. My wife's finishing a PhD at the moment, so I'm literally on, you know, duty with everything. I hope I can do it. I might not, but it will be coming soon. So if you actually go on to any of those, you'll see that when it comes out. And yeah, I think you'll enjoy it. So yeah, questions? Thank you.
Good. Thanks for putting all that work in, because I've used that. It takes like 2 minutes to spin up, and I use it. And knowing the effort and what you've gone through to create that, put it in place, yeah, it takes more.
It's truly evidence that sometimes it's faster to rebuild than restore. You've demonstrated it here. Yeah.
Thank you.
Have you had anyone running apps with your playground, or anyone sort of reported to you?
So I know a lot of people will actually, you know, where they use it on the course, they end up then, you know, they go off and they end up using it for, you know, for different things. And I've got someone at the moment which is on, he's actually, if you go into like the issues section on GitHub for that, Dive Into Ansible -images, he's actually trying to get this working with the, you know, the rel UBI image at the moment. So he's got some problems, and he's pinged me through what he's got. I'm not too sure why specifically he wants to get those ones working, but yeah, there's probably something behind that. All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
James is going to be around, so if you think of anything, just come and have a chat with him.